JB here. Hope everyone's doing outstanding. October 29, 9:14 a.m. on this fine Wednesday. Happy Fed Day for those who celebrate. Talk about the market, some names I'm looking at, go from there. S&P futures in the green. What else is new? Four sessions in a row rally. Well, continuation today. We make it 5 days in a row, but we closed in the green yesterday, 4 days in a row. If we close at all-time highs here today, that'll be the fourth consecutive time the NASDAQ, Dow, and S&P have closed at all-time highs. That'll be the most since, I think it's 2023. Remarkable stuff, all in the face of all these crazy headwinds, right? Joking aside, yesterday was kind of like an NVDA day, right? Partnerships everywhere. Yeah, Nokia coming back like it's 1999. Actually announced, a part. Well, at least JOBY was selected by NVIDIA's for their new NVIDIA chip for eVaults. So just a lot of different things yesterday with NVIDIA, but it surged 4% yesterday, and it looks like, oh, actually nearly 5%, and it looks like at the open here, it's going to be the first $5 trillion company. Remarkable stuff, right? It's the other remarkable part of it is when you take a look at a 5% move on NVIDIA, that's a $250 billion move in market capitalization. So, remarkable stuff. Some of the things I remember back in the day when Apple was the largest company on the planet, it would have like a 7% day. It would like boggle my mind because it's like $250 billion of market cap. Like the market has that company so wrong to have it move in that larger market cap, but maybe not, right? Anyway, all right. So that's overall markets. Big today, right? Today's one of the bigger days in recent memory. We have the Fed at 2 o'clock, Fed statement at 2, the presser at 2:30. Have to think nothing much in a way that surprise could move the markets unless it's a jumbo cut. And I don't even know if we would have a huge rally, but that would come as a surprise and no cut. And I think markets would come under some pressure. 0.5% implied move for the S&P today. So nothing crazy there. And then after the close, the Mag 7 names. So we got three more of the Mag 7, the important ones, the Googles, the Microsofts, and the Metas, because of the large CapEx spend that is a part of their business, right? And I think 2025 is nearly 500, well, actually 2026, over 500 billion in CapEx between Amazon, Meta, Google, Microsoft, and Oracle. So you take those names, and if there's to me, I think they're gonna have great quarters after the close. To me, it's a lot of it's gonna be about the CapEx spend for guidance for the coming quarters and next year, because I think if it's kind of like in line or maybe they scale back on the CapEx spend, markets might be a little on edge. But to me, I don't think there's going to be any crazy surprises. The problem now with the markets, blue sky breakouts, right? So it's kind of hard to find support resistance on the SPY. I put on the watch list maybe 685. I thought 685 would be, like the highs for this week, right? So sitting here at 689 on the SPY as I'm speaking, maybe that 690 handle. The thing is, once you get into it's like the airline, right? The plane taking off, right? So the hardest part of the takeoff is getting through those clouds, right? The turbulence, and then once you get through the clouds, there's a breakthrough, and then there's not much resistance anymore. It's clear sailing, right? So it's kind of like with the markets here. We're blue skies. We got through all that turbulence, and now it's like we're the sellers. So that's kind of like where we're at now. I mean, the sellers at 695 on the SPY. We'll find things out. I posted this yesterday too. It's funny. Yesterday afternoon, I'm talking about the amount of stocks trading over their 50-day moving average on the S&P, dropping under 50% and trending to the downside. And to me, that's, you could say that's a lack of breath, right? Bad breath. So I kind of made that as a joke, and not really a joke. There's always these things you can look at and make the case that, okay, maybe the market's on some rough footing. Look at the VIX, the 50-day moving average, things like that. But then you have a whole slew of folks talking about the market breath after the close. Yesterday was a record amount of lack of breath, meaning the first time the markets have closed in the green with an insane amount of stocks trading lower. So who knows? To me, it's a function of this AI craze, right? And it's like, if they're not in that space, it's like you're trading on a different market if you're not involved. And that's, unfortunately, why you see some of these companies announcing some deals with ChatGPT and NVIDIA, because they're like, if your name's not in that pot, your stock is probably not going to do too well. So that's quick on overall markets. Now, just individual names really fast. And, first I'll just talk about DELL. And I put this on the watch list this morning. DELL was frustrating, and not frustrating because, the calls paid some money yesterday, but frustrating because it couldn't break out on Monday. It gapped up 2%, and then my calls are flat. So I didn't want to be in a spot where I lost some money on the calls despite being right on the trade. So I closed them out And then sure enough, yesterday, and even in the morning, Dell wasn't breaking out. It was like 162. And then like 11:30, 12 o'clock, it started to move. And when it was 162, the calls were still flat. So just frustrating. Then it finally broke out. And then the rest is history, all the way up to 167 in the late afternoon. My 170 calls for this week were up 300%. What are you going to do? But I did go out and get next week's strikes. I was on the watch list. Uh, Similar, I don't want to be in a similar spot that I had with the 170, so I closed some out for 50% to cover some of the costs. Held the rest into today. I still think this is headed north of 170, and hopefully it happens sooner than later. Gapped up to 168 this morning, sitting around 167. 175 is the key spot. So I think once it breaks 170, there'll be some FOMO. So I might add some more lotto calls if it does break there, and obviously close some more of my 180s to lock in some profits when that happens. But love to set up here. And also on the heels of that too is Super Micro, right? Super Micro is not a name I've traded. It's a name I've watched. I remember watching it before it split. I think it was like a $20 stock, then a $80 stock, then 100, then all the way up to what, $1,000. Then you had those the big bears came out, had this, short piece on it, just this hit piece, fraud, some dealings talking about, cooking the books or whatever. And then the stock came under pressure, SEC investigation, so on and so forth. But it's still a name that like it does billions of dollars a rate. It's like a real company, right? It's not like one of these names that it's not like some of these frauds that they talk about. It's similar, in the right space, right time. Just there's been some issues in the past that they cleared up. So sometimes when you have these hit pieces, like similarly on Carvana, and I'm trying Roblox, obviously, recently, it creates opportunity. App loving. So Super Micro, obviously, it's not near its, and you take a look, it's a split. So I think it was $1,200. So $120 stock is sitting here at $54. I'm not saying it should be traded up to 120, but I do think there's opportunity here. So I was watching after it pre-released revenue yet last week, but some of the concern they said is that they're going to have to pull revenue into the following quarter. So it wasn't like they lowered guidance based on any kind of customer issue or revenue. It's because they just can't meet the demand for the current quarter. So the stock tanked, and then it recouped most of the losses, almost went into the green, almost recouped most of the losses the last 2 days. And then I'm watching yesterday, and I thought this morning, I'm like, this looks prime for a move. And then sure enough, they just announced that they're looking to add manufacturing facilities. The stock is up here in the pre-market. I might look for some $60 strikes, maybe even into next week, 65 calls, because I think at some point this one catches fire again. So not a name I've traded, and it's a divisive name, right? So sometimes I don't like divisive names because maybe I'm wrong on it as well. But the other thing is I think divisive names create opportunity. And I think right now there's an opportunity for upside. All right, Super Micro. Other names, PayPal, I had on the watch list yesterday morning talking about the news with its earnings and then the partnership with ChatGPT in regards to being the preferred payment processor. I thought that was the news. I was going to break it out of its glut. Sure enough, it's at 77, 78. Actually, it was 80 in the pre-market. Gave back some of the gains. And then I was watching in the morning thinking I'm going to get some calls for a move from 8 to 80 and beyond. And then it just melted. I think 11 o'clock was the highs, and then that's it. And if the market was open for another 45 minutes, it probably would have traded in the red. Just disappointing. I don't know if that's just kind of people taking profits after holding on to it for so long. I don't know. I do still think there's a possibility or probability it finds a bid again and gets back over 80 in the coming weeks. So don't be surprised if I use this little dip here to finally get some later dated strikes and after play into the 80s. And you got to look at PayPal. Like, I'm not saying it gets back to $300 from its COVID levels. Actually, was it higher than that? But I do think there's an opportunity to trade over $100 in the coming months. All right, so that's PayPal. Other names to watch, RH I was watching in the afternoon. I remember, Wayfair. So Wayfair traded for some nice profits back in the spring, right? I think I had like the 35 calls and the 40 calls. Fast forward 8 months or 200 days, $106 stock, right? So the trade probably would have been to get some $90 calls back in April, but can't talk about that now. That's the past. But I was thinking other names that typically run somewhat in lockstep with Wayfair is RH. And, RH was like 190 at the open or in the morning. Was it 190? Then 192 in the afternoon. Let's see, 190. Yeah, 191 by 12 o'clock. And then all of a sudden, it's like someone hit a button and it just takes off. 192 all the way up to 202. One half of me is always trying to get some lotto calls, but it's impossible to get the lotto calls when the premiums are so expensive. I was looking at the 220s. I think they were $1. And then all of a sudden, those were 240. And then I'm looking at the 230s. They were 50 cents. Those went up to $1.20. I almost pulled the trigger, sat on my hands, reverse course all the way down to 192, closing 193. Another name, I might look for some strikes into next week. You start looking at its moving averages, the 50 days right at 20, I think it's 209. So maybe it gets to that this week. I was looking, maybe it's 240s for next week. Call me crazy. The thing with RH, you don't need it to go to 240 next week to make money on the calls. It just has to go to 230 or 225 in the coming days, and those calls will be a couple 100% at minimum. So don't be surprised if I had some speculatos on that one today. Also, other names too, right? Seagate after the close yesterday, great quarter. You have to think maybe that starts to get SanDisk back in rally mode and finally get over 200 bucks. They report earnings November 6th, so hard to play for lottos into next week, but I might be back in SanDisk today if the premiums look decent on some of the strikes. I was looking yesterday. They're still kind of, you know, well priced, right? $17 implied move on the stock. So nearly a 10% implied move on the stock with 3 days expiration and no catalyst, right? Outside of the major earnings. I mean, with CapEx spend after the close could certainly move stocks. Maybe some 210s look interesting. The spreads are wide, 15 cents by $1.40. The good thing is they added some 250 increments on some of the strikes on the weekly. So could be doing some SanDisk today. NKLR has a conference, a virtual conference with Bank of America today. Maybe that's the spark that gets it going. And then gold, right? I'm not going to talk about gold too much. Gold is one of those things. It's fickle, right? And selling off at the start of the week, you saw some folks write, "Oh, the stronger U.S. dollar is weighing on gold," and then it's like, gold is rallying today, and the dollar's stronger. So now it's not the stronger dollar; it's more geopolitical tensions in Israel or whatever it's going to be, whatever the narrative is to rationalize the move in gold. But I'll continue to hold my GLL calls and the dust calls as well. It's going to be a bumpy ride. I still think, especially if you can't get back, find some footing, maybe 4,100. I think it heads to 37. So that's that, folks. Let's have a great day. I'll be back on audio later. Rock and roll.